Hi, Ryan Adams here from Natural Weight Loss Mastery and The Slim Vegan. I finally broke through with weight loss and lost 25 pounds in 12 weeks in 2015. And I've got to be honest, I didn't have a bloody clue what I was doing at the time. I did not have the understanding, the knowledge, the skill set that I do, of course, today, or you would like to think that I have today teaching what I teach nowadays. But looking back, there are actually 4 things in hindsight that I did correctly that I really feel were responsible for my breakthrough. I'm going to walk you through these 4 things. Hopefully you can inject them straight into your weight loss strategy and see better results than ever before. Let's get into it. Number 1 is actually something I did inadvertently, but it turned out to be, frankly, genius. It was a total mistake, so I can't take any credit for it. There's no intelligence behind it, no good planning, but it turned out to be genius for me. I finally followed a moderate, not aggressive calorie deficit. I know a great many people at home will resonate when I say one of the fatal mistakes I was making with weight loss in the past is I was taking my maintenance calories, and whether knowingly or not, I was taking 600 or 700 calories away from maintenance. And I just got so hungry, feeling deprived, lethargy, feelings of fatigue. I remember one period of time where I was cutting so I could look good in the pool for a mini trip coming up. And I actually lost libido, a lot of libido during that time, which was certainly not a pleasant feeling as a 20-year-old young man, let me tell you. And so in hindsight, when I went vegan plant-based, even though I wasn't tracking calories, I'd spent enough years prior to that tracking my calories that I could look at a cup of oats, for example. I knew, okay, that's about 330 calories. I could look at an apple and go 75, maybe 80 calories if it's a nice Granny Smith. I could look at a medium banana and go maybe between 90 and 110 calories. I had that knowledge, I had that ability to eyeball, quote unquote. And so I knew at the time, yes, I was in a calorie deficit, but it wasn't the aggressive stuff I was doing in the past. And it just meant I had longevity and sustainability to my efforts. And I wasn't so gung-ho about getting the weight off quickly. I think I'd finally got to the point where I was like, this fast weight loss stuff, it never seems to last, which sounds so obvious now, doesn't it? But at the time, that impatience, that instant gratification takes over, that desperate frustration that drives you towards like being so unhappy with how you look that you want to change it instantaneously. I kind of let that go. I'd seen the pitfalls of being dragged to the more aggressive approaches to weight loss. And so I could just relax with a little bit slower weight loss, but something that actually felt moderately sustainable for the first time in my life. And again, I didn't really know I was doing this at the time, but that eyeballing, that basic understanding of caloric density really broke me through there. I want to make clear here to anyone listening, portions still absolutely matter with this approach. There is some, sadly, messaging in this plant-based vegan space that you can eat unlimited portions because it's whole plant foods and you'll be absolutely fine from a weight loss perspective. My clients will attest to this. That is simply not the case. Many people will disagree with that through their experience. So portions do absolutely still matter. Luckily though, under the whole foods plant-based umbrella, there are so many foods that have such a low caloric density. In other words, they provide so much volume for very few calories comparatively, so compared to other foods, processed foods, animal products, so on and so forth, that it means you can eat quite generously. You're eating lots of these self-limiting foods which have lots of fiber content, great vitamin and mineral profile, and so you can achieve, I feel, a level of fullness and satiation per calorie that is simply not accessible with other diet methodologies. Does that make sense? So portions still absolutely matter, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to track and count every gram of food you eat. With some basic calorie consciousness, some basic understanding like I had of eyeballing, of the calories in various plant foods, you can start to assemble plates of food that you know will take you into a calorie deficit, but not such, this is my word of warning, not such an aggressive one that yes, you lose weight fast in the short term, but it's not sustainable. Number 2, eliminating oil meant that I instantly shaved 200 calories off my daily diet. Like that, got myself into a calorie deficit so much more easily. Oil is incredibly calorie rich, and my other problem with it is that for all those calories, you don't actually get that much nutrition because it's been processed and processed again and again at such a high heat. And although you can look at oil and go, well, surely it's from a vegetable source, olive oil. Olives are good for you, right? Yeah, absolutely they are in their whole form. But again, this has been something that's processed and processed and processed. So not only are you getting incredibly high calorie content, you're not actually getting that many nutrients for those calories. Unlike with something that's calorie rich, for example, another whole food like nuts and seeds, okay, they're calorically dense, but at the same time, you get loads of nutrition for those calories. So oil has a terrible nutrient to calorie ratio, I argue. And so by taking that out of my diet, 200, 250 maybe max calories instantly shaved off my diet. Now, I won't lie to you, this did take a little bit of adjustment, but it wasn't much more than a week for me. I had to get used to cooking, number one, without oil, and I had to get used to, secondly, that rich, oily taste, being without that rich, oily taste. But when you see what dressing options are available out there, I've talked about Tia's from Healthy Vegan Mama's amazing dressing recipe, so you can go to her channel. I cover it here, but she's definitely got more diversity, a greater range of dressings that you can check out on her channel and her cookbooks and whatnot. But when you actually start understanding, okay, all I need to do is use these herbs, spices, seasonings when I'm roasting foods. If I'm sauteing, you need to use water, maybe a bit of soy sauce, maybe vegetable broth, depending on what I'm cooking. And when you realize the other options that are out there and how to make food taste decent without oil, doesn't take much more than a couple of weeks to actually get in the habit of not using oil and not actually missing oil all that much. So that was a huge thing for me, just an instant win, get the oil out, shave 200, 250 calories off my daily diet, easy peasy. The third reason for my weight loss success back in 2015, I actually didn't do that much exercise. In fact, my transformation back then was very, very nutrition focused. In fact, I did far less exercise than what I was doing previously. Many of you know I had my gym bro days back in my university years. During that time, I was going to the gym doing weight training 5 or 6 times a week. I would then jump on the elliptical or high incline treadmill and do at least 20 to 30 minutes there. I lived in a city at the time, so I was doing a bunch of walking, at least 30 minutes of walking on average, perhaps more, a day on top of that. And so I was doing a fairly rigorous, let's say, not a crazy amount of cardio, but let's say a fairly rigorous exercise routine. When I went vegan, I also started my first full-time job outside of university, and generally speaking, I had a lot less time to do exercise. And so I actually cut my exercise right back, not necessarily out of preference. I've always loved exercise. It's always been the food that's been my problem, but rather just as a result of my change in schedule. And I was still doing my daily walking because I didn't move cities, but 30 minutes of walking a day. But I was going to the gym, but I was only going to the gym for maybe 30 minutes in a session, quite late at night after work. And I cut it back down to about 3 to 4 times at most per week. So I fairly significantly, cut back on my exercise routine, but actually finally broke through with weight loss. What was that about? Well, I think I finally understood that it really was the nutrition that is the deal breaker. And I think I wasn't naive to this before, but I maybe overemphasized the role that exercise played. And it was quite nice to just focus on sort of gentle, steady state stuff, just doing a little bit of walking, as I say, some weight training, but not anywhere near as much as what I was doing previously. And I think in hindsight, what I realized is in the past, I was definitely overcompensating for terrible food choices with all of this exercise. So I could justify the Pop-Tarts and the Ben & Jerry's by saying, well, I'll just, I'm training loads, I'm doing loads of exercise, etc., etc. And so to just focus on the nutrition, just think about fixing my food choices instead of having to sort of outrun and burn off all those calories. Well, that was a blessing at the time, absolutely. Number 4, the final one here, and this is unorthodox, but stick with me because actually I think I would not have broken through without getting this thing right. I was finally busy. I alluded to this on the previous point, but about the time I went vegan, about the time I stumbled across whole foods, plant-based diets online in 2015, was also about the time I got my first full-time job. And I finally, for the first time in several years, felt a sense of responsibility. I was stimulated with my day-to-day schedule again. And I didn't feel this, generally speaking, in my university years, especially the second and third years of my studies, where I felt all that self-study time, managing my own schedule. I was lazy back then, folks. It didn't end well. And I'd rather just watch some Netflix, and I started turning to food as something to do, which contributed to the weight gain. You've heard me talk about my boredom eating problems in my university years many times, so we don't need to rehash that one here. But yeah, that certainly contributed to the weight gain. So to have 9 hours of the day where I was doing something that I truly enjoyed for the first time in a little while, well, 50% of my emotional eating, 50% of my turning to food as something to do out of boredom, was immediately wiped out overnight when I got that first full-time job. So that was lovely, and that was an absolute blessing. Of course, I was still faced with the urge and impulse to eat, maybe when I came home after 6 p.m. or on the weekends, and actually I was still a big emotional eater after going vegan, 18 months after going vegan, down the line. But to immediately have 50% of it, let's say it's anecdotal, but 50% of it wiped out overnight with that first full-time job, well, that was lovely. So if you are turning to food out of emotion right now, it might not be boredom, it might be stress, it might be a sense of reward, a treat, a pick-me-up after a productive day. There are many forms, as I've spoken about many times, of emotional eating. But if that does resonate with you, if the boredom connects particularly with you, change something up. Your schedule could be repetitive. You might not be doing something that's meaningful to you. Generally speaking, I wasn't happy with how I was spending my time back then, and I solved, or I largely improved that problem with that first full-time job. So that's it. Those are my 4 tips that you go away now and hopefully inject into your weight loss strategy and see better results than ever before. Hold your horses. I'm not letting you go just yet. I've got a couple of extra rapid-fire bonus tips for you. Let's just reel these off here. Number 1, be repetitive with your meals. Permission to keep things simple. You only need 5 or 6 different meals a week. Put the cookbooks away. They're so complex, they're so elaborate. Find meals you actually enjoy. Just stick to those. Build habits. The weight loss will fly off of you and it won't feel like a chore. Number 2, this is an obvious one, so it's fairly self-explanatory. Just focus on the whole foods. Yes, you can have some processed foods and you'll still lose weight overall. You can occasionally have a vegan burger. And there are some processed foods that are actually health and weight loss friendly, like whole wheat bread and whole wheat pasta, so on and so forth. I've talked about these a lot. But generally speaking, focus on those more nutrient-rich and lower-calorie whole foods to break through. The third thing that I got right in 2015, on this bonus tip section, I hardly ate out. And this actually was frankly because number 1, I was terrified of how it would affect weight loss. Overly so. I was actually overly paranoid, but that's why. But also secondly, because veganism in 2015, it still wasn't that big. It was starting to rise up, but it still wasn't that big. So there wasn't actually that many options for me in my city at the time. So I hardly ate out, and this allowed me to take food off its pedestal, change my story of food. I didn't allow it to become such an activity anymore. And yes, we have all of these traditions and whatnot and stories around food, but really, it was helpful to start seeing it as nourishment, fuel, as a function of my day, rather than this big event or activity. And the 4th thing I got right back at that period of my life as well, is I was hardly drinking alcohol. And I still very rarely drink alcohol to this day, but in this period of my time, I was going months on end, best parts of years, without touching alcohol. And that was after some heavy drinking in my university years, especially my first year. Not only is alcohol, of course, terrible for you and terrible for weight loss, utterly toxic and best avoided quite obviously, but it's not just directly the effect alcohol has on your body, it's also then indirectly how it lowers your inhibitions and encourages other poor food choices. So those are things I actually got right back in 2015. Another rapid fire couple here. These are things actually I got wrong back then. I hardly tracked or measured my progress. I could have been far more on the ball with that. That would have been helpful. When I first went vegan, I was actually hardly eating any vegetables. I've always been a big fruit eater, but for a long time, especially throughout university, I wasn't eating all that many vegetables. And so even when I first went vegan, yes, I was having lots of fruit. I was getting lots of other good nutrients from the other foods. I was having lots of beans, as I still do to this day. But in terms of the vegetables, especially the dark leafy greens, I wasn't getting those, and I fixed that, about a year or 2 in, but initially that was a big mistake of mine. And also something I did wrong at the time, I never considered supplements. And by the way, this wasn't exclusively vegan mistake. I had never supplemented at any point in my life. And so as I learned a little bit more about nutrition, I understood the value of sort of filling the gaps of using supplements as an insurance policy. I just didn't know that previously, and that would have been helpful at that time. So that's it, my 4 tips, and then all the rapid fire stuff at the end there. This is how I did it. This is how my transformation happened back in 2015. Hope it helps you out. If you found the information in this video helpful, but you need that next level of instruction, support, and accountability to number 1, lose weight, number 2, learn how to easily keep it off this time round, and number 3, create healthy habits for life, click the link below. I'll tell you more about how I've helped over 300 men and women lose 10, 20, 30 or more pounds with simple plant-based meals without having to count or track their calories and with gentle exercise only. Click the link below this video.